and welcome to Tutorial 7, Quoting and Paraphrasing. This tutorial will show you how you can incorporate the ideas that you read in books and other publications into your written work. So after completing the tutorial, you should understand the difference between using a direct quotation and paraphrasing, when it's appropriate to use a direct quotation and when this should be avoided, and how to go about paraphrasing another author's idea. Much of your written work will involve you using the ideas of experts in your area of study. There are different ways of incorporating these ideas into your works. You might do this by directly quoting an author or by what we call paraphrasing. Let's consider the differences between these two approaches. The table in this slide summarises the key features of direct quotations and paraphrased texts. To directly quote means to use the exact wording that the author has used. Quotations have quotation marks and usually contain just a small segment of text. Paraphrasing, unlike quoting, doesn't match the original text word for word and instead involves putting the text into your own words. Now, very importantly, paraphrasing changes the original wording, but it doesn't change the meaning of the text. Whether you're quoting or paraphrasing, you still need to provide a reference to show where the idea has come from. Paraphrasing can be a difficult skill to learn, and we'll provide some tips on how to paraphrase later in this tutorial. This slide shows how the writer makes the same point using a direct quotation in the example on the left, and by paraphrasing in the example on the right. In the example on the left, the writers used the original wording of the author and a reference with a page number to indicate where the quotations come from. On the example on the right, the writers paraphrased the original text using their own words. A reference is provided to indicate that the idea belongs to somebody else. You can pause the video while you read through the examples. Okay, so now we know that you can include an author's idea in your writing by using a direct quotation or by paraphrasing, but which one's best? Well, if you're new to academic writing, you'll probably be quite tempted to use direct quotes because that's probably quite a bit easier than paraphrasing. But direct quotes shouldn't be used too often, and that's because using direct quotes doesn't really demonstrate that you understand the point that the author's making. You'll impress your marker much more if you put the author's point into your own words. You should only really use quotes where you really want to capture the author's original wording, because maybe it's particularly clever or unique in some way. An example of this is shown in the next slide. Here's an example of where the writer has made good use of a direct quotation. This idea of picking up a wet fish from a stream is actually quite a clever one, and it captures the point very well and makes the quote, I suppose, quite unique. Most of the time though, there won't be anything particularly special about the author's wording, so you really should try to paraphrase rather than rely on direct quotations. You can pause the video while you read through the extract. So, we've established that most of the time, paraphrasing is the best way to incorporate authors' ideas into your work. Paraphrasing is an important academic writing skill, but it does take a great deal of practice, and students are often scared of putting what they read into their own words, because authors' words are often considered to be much better than what they could write themselves. Now, whilst this might be the case, staff don't actually expect you to be able to write as well as published authors. The important point is that you try to paraphrase rather than avoid it by making excessive use of direct quotations. So how do you go about paraphrasing? Well, students often make the mistake of thinking that paraphrasing means changing a few words around or changing the sentence structure. This isn't the case, and in fact, if all you do is substitute one word for another, you could actually be accused of plagiarising. To avoid plagiarism, your paraphrase text needs to actually be quite far removed from the original text. And the best way to achieve this is to follow the 3 steps shown in the slide. First of all, think about the point that the original author's making. What is it that they're actually trying to say? Then, once you fully understand that, and that might even take a bit of time, write it out in your own words in a way that makes sense to you. It doesn't matter whether those words are good or bad, just use words that make sense to you. Finally, once you've got your head around the point that the author's making, convert your own wording to a more appropriate academic style, and remember to include the reference. Also, be very careful that you don't change the meaning of the text. Now, this process can take a bit of time at first, but as with all academic skills, the more you practice, the easier it gets. Here we have an example of a paraphrased extract. Read through the example and notice how the writer has maintained the original meaning but used their own words. Notice also how far removed from the original text the paraphrased text is. The writer hasn't just simply substituted 1 or 2 words for others. You can pause the video while you read through the example before we move on to the final slide. The key points of this tutorial are: you can incorporate the ideas of others into your work by using direct quotations or paraphrasing. Avoid excessive use of direct quotes though, and paraphrase wherever possible. Paraphrasing involves putting an author's idea into your own words, and it is a key academic writing skill. To paraphrase, avoid simply substituting 1 word for another. You should think about the point that the author is trying to make and then use your own words to express that point. Finally, to practice your paraphrasing skills, take a random extract from an academic text and practice writing it in your own words following the procedure that we outlined earlier. Doing this kind of activity will really help you develop your academic writing skills and make life much easier when it comes to writing assignments.